I'm Mark Kuczewski from the Stritch School of Medicine, where I chair the Department of Medical Education and have worked on our DREAMER project there. Today's session, as you know, has 4 members from a task force that we had across the university called the University Collaborative on Undocumented Student, or UCUS, as it was nicely an acronym. We want to talk to you a little bit about things that have been going on across the spectrum here at the university and a little bit about where we think the future is going. We're going to have 4 speakers. The first will be Catherine Kafka-Waltz, who directs the Center for Human Rights of Children at Loyola University Chicago, and she'll give you the overview of what DREAMers are, DACA, and all of these kinds of things, and the limitations and opportunities. I'll talk a little bit about the Stritch School of Medicine experience with this, because I think that both our experience has been informed by the values of the university and now has also contributed back towards that. Then we will have Kathleen Moss-Weigert, who, as many of you know, is the assistant to the provost for social justice initiatives at Loyola University Chicago. And she actually chaired and led the UCUS group and has put together the report. And then finally we'll have, last but not least, Flavio Bravo, who is the president of the Unified Student Government Association and was a member of our task force and has spearheaded many of the student-led efforts to welcome DREAMers to our university. So that's the introductions. In the interest of time, we'll just go to it one after another. All right, I'm going to share a little bit about the Stritch experience, which, as I say, is embedded deeply in the Loyola University experience. Going back to 2011, which, as you just learned from Catherine's presentation, is prior to the creation of DACA, which happens in June of 2012. So prior to that, an email arrives in my mailbox, and it's from a professor of mathematics at Loyola Marymount in Los Angeles. And Herbert Medina sent this email. And, and I always start the story that way, but it's not a coincidence that that happens. It happens because the university was one of 6 Jesuit universities working with, in collaboration, leading with Fairfield University in Connecticut to study the issue of undocumented students at the Jesuit universities. It was already conceived of by Father Garanzini as key to our mission, and so we were engaged in this. And because Loyola Marymount was being interviewed extensively, because in Los Angeles they had a lot of experience, Professor Medina hears about us, says that place, Loyola, has a medical school, and so when he needs to talk to somebody about a student who wants to go on to medical school, he launches an email in our direction. And in only 2 forwards, that email found its way into my mailbox. And the student he described, we'll call her Clara, that's not her real name, he called the best student he'd ever had. She had a 3.94 GPA. She was bilingual, bicultural, had a double major, and had a variety of service activities. And he said she really wants to be a physician. She wants to go to medical school. One problem, though, she's a dreamer. And can dreamers go to medical school and become physicians? And so my first reaction to that was, I have no idea if she can or not. Obviously, though, and if you're going to remember only 2 words that from my presentation, the 2 words that sum it up are asset and welcome. One of the things that we always think about when we talk about dreamers is, what's the lacking, what's the deficit, the challenges we have to overcome. You need to remember that, in fact, these students are assets who bring a variety of skills and interests. As we just heard with Clara, she's got all this stuff. She interests us for a very particular reason. We're a medical school. We're in the business of taking the best and the brightest. She sounds like one of them. She's being described as one of those. So of course we're interested in that she is an asset. And when you are an asset, you're entitled to be welcomed, not just tolerated. We want to recruit the best and the brightest. So she had these, and part of that package, along with her academic qualifications, are these personal ones. Navigating systems when you're undocumented are pretty difficult. And she had managed to successfully do that up through an undergraduate career at a private university. She's got those qualities of overcoming barriers and challenges, which is a good one you're looking forward to, its leadership qualities. She adds diversity, right? She's bilingual, bicultural. While she's a member of our communities, been raised within our communities, and really remembers this as the only country she can remember, she also is very in touch with the immigrant experience. She's been raised by immigrant parents. She understands this community. And so there's a social justice component to her possibilities here, namely that she's able to serve communities that are underserved as a physician. Right? When one of the things that when people look at data on underserved communities and physicians who come from those communities often return usually at unusually high rates to serve those communities. So the chances that she's got something that she's going to bring back, it goes along very, very much with our social justice mission as a Jesuit medical school to turn out a workforce to serve those communities. And there's also just the social justice consideration for her. I mean, she has worked hard. She's a member of our community. It's the only country she knows. She's merited, she has all the qualifications for admission. And so there is just the thing that social justice, meaning not a handout, but a hand up, the ability to participate fully in our communities. And so if we really believe in social justice, it's our duty to do what we could to shepherd her and steward her as a resource, as an asset to become a physician. Unfortunately, this was 2011. And so I wrote a rather extensive research report on this, and there were really two main barriers. There are no legal obstacles to educating her. We had a financial aid barrier, because as you just heard from Catherine very nicely, ineligible for any federal student aid, including federal student loans. And medical students consume large amounts of federal student loans. And they're good credit risks because they make a lot of money and they pay back their loans. Their default rate is minimal. But if you can't get that loan, you've got a big tuition bill and no way to pay it. So there was that very practical obstacle. But the bigger barrier was that prior to the creation of DACA, she could not work with authorization in the United States. And so we would educate her, get her through an MD after her name, and then when it came time for residency, the next stage in training, residency is actually a job. Residents are employees of their training program and are paid by them. And so without an ability to work with authorization, she would be stuck. She could be an MD but never practice and treat patients lawfully in the United States. And so at that point, I always say we were in limbo because we didn't know what to do. We didn't want, if we were going to overcome this financial aid problem, we were going to have to pour lots of resources into this student, and with no real promise that she would be able to, in fact, practice and treat patients, which is our mission, to turn out physicians to treat patients. And so we would have to take her on the hope that something changed with immigration or that something came along. And people were not really, didn't really want to do that. That was a little bit nervous. So we were in limbo. I always say it felt like hell, but it was just limbo at the time. Fortunately, lo and behold, June 15th, 2012, President Obama makes a speech, tells us about the creation of DACA. The beauty of what we heard was the work permit that you just heard, a social security number. We immediately checked with our state licensing board, read our state's Medical Practice Act very closely, and they said, yes, that's everything she would need to become a resident in the state of Illinois. And as best as we could tell, looking at a lot of other states' Medical Practice Acts, it looked like most states had pretty similar laws on the books, so she could probably practice in very many places. Of course, there are some states with very strict anti-immigrant legislation. You know them by now: Arizona, Georgia, Alabama, where that probably isn't possible. But with that, our dean, Dr. Linda Brubaker, really put forward the idea, this word welcoming, that we need to bring these students in the front door. Because now that they were eligible, we weren't going to just sneak them in and sort of off the record take people like Clara who apply, who are lucky enough to know that we might take them. But then, in fact, we need to make it clear that we are going to allow them to apply. Because along with social justice now became non-discrimination. If she has everything she needs to become a practicing physician, and people like her have that, who are we to have requirements on our admissions criteria that, as it said at the time, you have to be a U.S. citizen or permanent legal resident? And so we had on our criteria that excluded her, so we weren't going to just take her off the books. The dean said we need to change the actual wording of our criteria. So on our website, we went that you have to be a U.S. citizen, legal permanent resident, or eligible for the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program at the time of admission, thereby becoming the first medical school in the United States to openly say that we would accept applications from these students. So again, the front door, not sneaking them in. And so The beauty of this is that Dean Brubaker then decided that, in fact, we needed to enlist the community's support in this. That we were agreeing to take a bunch of students potentially, if they qualified for admission, if they had the qualifications and came in, we were agreeing to take students who did not have access to normal financial aid and so on. We needed to shout from the rooftops that we were doing it and we needed help of our community to do this if we could. And so announcing it to our board of trustees and at other public venues, it did begin to enlist some private donations for this, and also attracted the interest of the Illinois Finance Authority, our state's infrastructure bank, that worked with us to create a student loan program for these. Remember, I said they're very good credit risks. They don't default. And so the Illinois Finance Authority said, we'll make a loan program that essentially will loan them tuition dollars in exchange for service in underserved communities after they finish their training. So they were building the physician infrastructure in our underserved communities. A win-win for everybody involved. Like most loan programs of this kind of it's modeled on public health service loan programs. No interest if they fulfill their service requirement, their several year service requirement. Very high interest rate should they welch on the service requirement. Okay, so, but these students were very interested in service. It became a teachable moment within the life of our school. As you can imagine, we were worried there might be pushback being this open about it. In fact, mostly what we found by speaking publicly and working with student organizations that were interested in this, our Latino Medical Student Organization, our Student National Medical Association, our Asian Pacific American Medical Student Association, they wanted to co-sponsor information sessions with us for our community, both our faculty and our students. And some typical questions came. The ones that came most commonly are, is this some kind of affirmative action program? Or do they not have to have the qualifications the other students did? And of course, we just answered, no, they have to qualify. Their full profile needs to meet the normal criteria. And so that put that kind of thing to rest. The other question they right away asked is, are they going to be able to get licensed? Are they going to be able to practice medicine? Because they assume they wouldn't be able to. So, because people don't really, most people, DACA went right, it wasn't a blip on the news screen that day in June. And so we have to explain that. But once we put those criteria forward, we gathered huge support because Loyola does attract the kind of people who are interested in social justice. And most people were very, very proud of this initiative and still are. As you can imagine, nothing's 100%. A few exceptions who are very vocal and feel very differently about this. We have 7 dreamers in our current first-year class who came in, who qualified and met all the criteria and are part of the loan program. That's what day 1 looked like at the press conference at the school. One of our students, Johanna, speaking on behalf of her dreamer peers. One of the interesting things, only Johanna was identified as being a dreamer at the day, because we've had to strike a balance between offering opportunities. These students know that people telling their story has helped them get to this point and helped to change social policy, and also being somewhat protective of them to allow them to just go on and be medical students. So we've always offered opportunities that presented themselves. A fair amount of media interest was generated, but also allowed them to beg off of these kinds of opportunities. Johanna was willing to speak on behalf of the group that day. You notice Senator Durbin behind her. The other students blend in with an equal number of people who are non-dreamer students, so nobody else had to be identified, even if they were a supporter or a dreamer among that. But it was quite a moving event. And again, this is our webpage that gives all the information for dreamers who choose to apply. And of course, Dean Brubaker, who's pictured on the left there, that was the only instruction I got when I was writing the page. Put the word welcome prominently, and all the other words I got to pick. Our medical students, as you may know, there's a lot of politics around DACA. Congress occasionally votes to repeal it or override it. In response to that, our medical student leadership wrote a letter of support, really essentially when you try to take something away from these peers of ours, you're taking it away from us. And it's been published on the website of the Ignatian Solidarity Network. And because these slides are available in this recorded presentation, I did include a bunch of references with links, and you can see all that at your own leisure. Thank you.